I want to talk to you a little bit now about the establishment of the St Hilda's Learning Institute. It started, or the genesis for the idea started when I was lucky enough to be asked to present at the Blackboard World Conference in New Orleans right back in 2012. At this conference I was lucky enough to meet Salman Khan, who gave one of the most inspiring keynote presentations I've been lucky enough to hear. And this really set me thinking about how we can use the internet to develop education. Not long after returning to Australia, I was asked by my head of school to speak at a remote learning conference in Goondiwindi. And while I was there, I was doing all the normal things, communicating with the St Hilda's girls back on the Gold Coast while I was in the motel in Goondiwindi, and not really thinking much about it until I went to this conference and met a lot of mostly wonderful rural women who are responsible for the education of their children in remote areas of Australia, and they look after their educational needs until they're old enough and mature enough to move on to boarding schools like our own. And this really got me thinking about my own educational background and what we might do to help them. I actually grew up in the metropolis of Warracknabeal, which is 1,800 people now, in the centre of the Wimmera wheat and sheeplands. And I went to a small, very small primary school, one teacher school of 12 students, and I went back for my father's 80th birthday some time ago, a couple of years back, and my previous school is gone. Like many small, remote, rural primary schools, they're no longer funded by governments, and the whole emphasis for education has shifted back onto the families in these rural areas. I went to boarding school myself, and I spent many years working in boarding schools. I spent 10 happy years at Geelong Grammar School in Victoria. I was fortunate enough to be an exchange fellow at Deerfield Academy in Massachusetts, USA, which is where I got a lot of my ideas, as I've said previously, for online learning. But I've also worked at the other end of the spectrum on education aid projects in Fiji. Here we built a small remote boarding school in the Asawan Islands of Fiji, about 7 hours by boat from the mainland. And I also worked on aid projects in Bangladesh. So I've seen most ends of the education spectrum. And now I'm lucky enough to be working in the wonderful campus of St Hilda's here on the Gold Coast. So I had been very lucky. I was a boy from the bush who had the opportunity to get a good education. And it really made me think when I saw Salman Khan, who's responsible for changing lives of people through the Khan Academy website. What can St Hilda's do to offer opportunities to others that weren't fortunate enough to be on our campus? And I've got two sayings that I like to trot out to my students, and I like to live by. To swear off making mistakes is very easy. All you've got to do is swear off having ideas, and you'll have a very safe and boring life. And never be afraid to try something new, because remember that amateurs built the Ark and professionals built the Titanic. That's from one of my favourite philosophers, Groucho Marx. So it was about this time that the penny dropped for me, that if I could have been in Goondiwindi communicating with the St Hilda's girls, why couldn't I be on the campus of St Hilda's and communicating with the more remote learners in Australia? And what better way to communicate, I thought, than via iTunes U. And that's where the idea for the St Hilda's Institute developed. And in the next film I'll talk to you a little bit about what we've done with iTunes U.